So I never actually got around to reviewing the Pixel 8 Pro, not just because I'm a lazy well, kind of because of that, but also because it kind of felt half finished when it first launched, kind of like a half-baked pie. Oh, really fancy pie now. But how does it feel 6 months on, especially with all that hot rivalry from Samsung's Galaxy S24 series, the OnePlus 12, and loads of other fresh 2024 flagships? Well, I've been testing it out a lot over the past half a year, had my SIM slapped in there for several weeks, and I recently returned to it full time so I could finally get this review shot. So here's what I reckon of the Pixel 8 Pro, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now, Google's most premium Pixel is a 6.7 incher as usual, this time with a completely flat display. Thankfully, it doesn't feel any girthier than previous Pixel Pros despite the lack of curvy edges. It's a proper hand filler as usual, but it doesn't feel quite as cumbersome to clutch or quite as hefty as the likes of Samsung's Galaxy S24 Ultra and the biggest blowers out there. And you've always got that camera bump which doubles as a handy finger shelf, pretty useful for those one-handed exploits. And no, not those one-handed exploits. Plus, the fact that the camera bump stretches the full width of the Pixel 8 Pro means it won't wobble about all over the joint when you're using it on a desk or a table or whatever. And thankfully, Google's £1,000 phone is a pretty hardy bugger as well. You've got Gorilla Glass Victus 2 front and back. You've also got a bit of screen protector action slapped on there. And I haven't used a case or a cover with the Pixel 8 Pro in the several months of squeezing it into pockets with other smartphones for camera comparisons, all that shenanigans. And so far, touch wood, that arse end is still in perfect nick. It's almost box fresh. Although sadly, the old camera bump, as usual, has scratched up a wee bit over time. Of course, the big question is, will it still look this good in 7 years when the software support runs out? And by that point, most phones would probably look about as appealing as James Corden's jockstrap, but I reckon the Pixel 8 Pro will stand the test of time. And while Google went with the shiny arse for the regular Pixel 8, thankfully you've got a matte finish here on the Pixel 8 Pro. This can still get a wee bit manky at times, especially if you're, for instance, messaging while occasionally dipping into a Morley's family feast. But, just give it one of these, I'll sort it right out. I've got to say, I really like this blue version, which is the one I've had my SIM slapped in every time. But Google's latest mint model is definitely my new favourite. Reminds me of snacking on mint choc chip ice creams on a northeastern beach back when I was a sprog. If the enormous angry seagulls didn't get you, the pneumonia probably would. And as you would expect from a phone that costs basically $1,000, the Pixel 8 Pro is IP68 water and dust resistant, so it can get proper moist, no worries. And speaking of moisture, that in-display fingerprint sensor is generally fine, but if your hands are a wee bit wet, then chances are it just won't be happy at all. Thankfully, you do always have that face unlock feature as a backup, and generally this works really well, although occasionally it can be a wee bit lethargic. And it's not as good as some rivals when it comes to low light, that's for sure. So if you're a big fan of candlelit baths, say, you'll probably find yourself sticking your pin in an awful lot. And naturally, because this is a Google blow, you've got the latest, freshest Android on here, but with lots of pixely bonus bits chucked on top. All the old bangers like call screening are present and correct, and frankly it's features like this is one of the major reasons I always really look forward to getting back into Pixel when I've been reviewing other phones. And with this generation, Google is very generously and kindly offering 7 full years of OS and security updates, so this thing will see you right through to 2030-ish. I mean, frankly, this thing should outlast me, given my deep fondness for Greg's steak bakes and my general alcohol abuse. And Android 14 very much looks and feels like Android 13, shock horror. But you got a fair few new features chucked in there just to mix things up a bit, including some excellent new safety features. And after various updates, the Pixel 8 Pro is even more of a smart arse with a jolly sack full of fresh AI shenanigans. So for instance, the Pixel can now generate a batshit crazy AI wallpaper on demand. Today I really fancy myself an X-ray aubergine in pink, naturally. And there's our results. Jesus Christ, that looks all kinds of wrong. And the Pixel 8 Pro can also handily translate a foreign person into English if you never bothered to learn anything beyond a courteous uno biro grande por favore. The Recorder app can produce a transcription on demand as usual, and it works perfectly fine as long as you don't mind a good bit of erroneous punctuation and occasionally weird spelling. But the Pixel 8 Pro now also boasts a summarization tool which can just sum up the main points in any recording. It's a great idea, and it works better than I thought it would, but it only really excels when your recordings are under 5 minutes, otherwise it tends to miss out quite a lot of major points. And another new AI feature that I have very mixed feelings about is the website summarization. This could be very handy for pulling the main points out of a page, especially now that everyone's got to put all this diatribe at the start of their pieces to appease Google. But as someone who worked as a journalist for, a decade or so, it does make me feel kind of manky knowing that someone's carefully crafted prose could be absolutely shredded to bits by an AI bot just to save us, a few minutes. Anyway, this feature is only available in the US right now. Apparently can't get it to work here on my British Pixel 8 Pro. Brexit special. So yeah, fine. Enjoy your prose butchery tool, you heathens. You've also got that circle to search feature, which isn't particularly good for searching for people, I've found, which is a shame because that's what I mostly use it for. But it is excellent for searching for the stuff that they're wearing and other goods. Anyway, most of the features chucked on here should prove useful to someone in some capacity, with the exception of one, and it's one of the Pixel 8 Pro exclusives no less, that ruddy temperature sensor, which frankly is quite a baffling addition. It's just as random as the twisty seconds screen on the LG Wing or the blow to unlock feature on the Micromax Canvas 4. Yeah, that's right, you actually had to blow your phone to get it to do anything. I should say blow on your phone to get it to do anything. If you had to blow it, it would be the smartphone equivalent of a lazy husband. But anyway, I am determined to find an actual purpose for this thermometer thing. One of the Google suggestions was testing your coffee to make sure it's not too hot before you drink it. But honestly, I've got no idea what the perfect temperature of an Americano is supposed to be. And frankly, I'm so desperate for caffeine most of the time that I'll happily suffer third-degree burns of the esophagus just to get it in me. But anyway, if you want to know more on the software side of the Google Pixel 8 Pro, I have done a full, lovely tips and tricks guide for the Pixel 8 series, packed to the tits with googly goodness, so go check that out. And as for bugs and all that shenanigans, well, thankfully the Pixel 8 Pro has been much better behaved than it was when it first launched. As you would imagine, lots of updates have rolled on through. Occasionally, when I'll open an app every sort of few days or so, it might freeze up on me just for a few seconds while the phone thinks really hard about it, and then everything will just continue as normal. And that's about as bad as it gets these days. However, the storage situation is rather pants. Despite the sky-high asking price, you've got only 128 gigs of this stuff unless you chuck even more money at Google. And of course, there's bugger all microSD support as usual, so I've had to delete albums off of these and all kinds of stuff to make more space. Not helped by the fact that Genshin Frickin' Impact takes up 30 gigs by itself. And while I'm having a proper good old moan, there's only space for one physical SIM card in the Pixel 8 Pro, though at least you've got eSIM support, so that makes up for it. And that's the ranty bit over, because when it comes to that 6.7-inch OLED display, I've got nothing to complain about. It's another bright, poppy, punchy panel with a Quad HD Plus resolution, 2992 by 1344. So those visuals are absolutely pin sharp. You do have HDR streaming support in the likes of Netflix, but it's only HDR10, sadly, same as Samsung. There's no Dolby Vision support here. And while that brightness doesn't quite seem to hit the highs of some ultra rivals in 2024, it's certainly more than bright enough to clearly see what you're doing outdoors, even when the old sun decides to poke out for a few seconds. I do still kind of miss the anti-reflective Gorilla Glass armor display that you get on the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, but honestly no real issues here. And of course it's LTPO tech, so that refresh rate can drop as low as 1 Hz to preserve battery life when it's just a static image. That scales all the way up to 120 Hz for apps and games and the like. And the Pixel 8 Pro's stereo speakers are pretty effing good as well. You got reasonable balance here, that earpiece blaster isn't a complete sack of cack, and they're loud enough to do the job in quite a noisy place. And absolutely no issues really when streaming over Bluetooth to a pair of wireless earbuds. Occasional tiny little drops and stumbles if you're in a very, very busy environment, London Bridge Station, something like that, but generally perfectly behaved. And so now on to the slightly sketchy subject of performance, and of course you've got the Tensor G3 stuffed inside of the Pixel 8 Pro, backed by 12 gigs of lovely RAM. And the gaming experience on here is not quite as fluid, shall we say, as what you'll get with the latest Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 flagships, or to be honest, even with some of the older Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 blowers. Every time I play Genshin Impact on those maxed out settings, this thing stumbles more than a boozed up Brit tackling a cobblestone street alone at night on roller skates. And don't get me wrong, it's still perfectly playable, but that frame rate does drop to practically single figures for a couple of seconds every now and then, which is pretty weak sauce from a premium smartphone with this sort of price tag. but thankfully at least those heating issues from earlier Tensors seems to be mostly sorted. The Pixel 8 Pro only gets a wee bit warm when you're gaming for an hour or so, nothing too tragic. And it hasn't once got proper hot during everyday use, unlike the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Proper little thigh toaster that was. But even though it's been on a few jaunts abroad, I haven't really tested out in anywhere particularly hot just yet, so yeah, maybe check back again in July. Oh, and yeah, compared with the competition, the gaming mode here on the Pixel 8 Pro is still complete arse. I've had absolutely bugger all problems with connectivity, though I usually get 5G on this thing exactly where I would expect to, and the Wi-Fi absolutely fine as well. Now, like most of its supersized rivals, the Pixel 8 Pro sports a pretty bloody big battery, 5050 mAh capacity, and I found absolutely no battery life woes whatsoever here on the Pixel 8 Pro. It happily lasts me a full day every day that I've been testing it. And I've usually still got plenty of juice in the tank left when I plug it in, toy it on my bedside table and faceplant my pillow, get all tucked up with Teddy. That's with around sort of 6 to 7 hours of screen on time roughly, with mixed use, plenty of camera play, good bit of audio and video streaming, all the good stuff. Though obviously if you're gaming on the likes of Genshin, that will sap the power considerably faster. Sadly, the 30-watt wired charging support is rather slow compared with a lot of rivals. So even when it claims it's fast charging, it'll still generally take well over an hour to power back up if it is fully drained. And you do have wireless charging support, but again, it's 23 watts. So let's finish up this slightly ranty Pixel 8 Pro review with a look at the camera tech. And you've got a triple lens setup here, headlined by a 50 megapixel Octa-PD camera with optical image stabilization and multi-zone laser detect autofocus. And the Pixel 8 Pro has a few little bonus features that you won't find in the regular Pixel 8, a few more settings, so tap your way into Pro. You can change up the resolution from 12 megapixel to the maximum 50 meg. In here you've also got manual lens selection, and you've also got the ability to shoot in RAW format, as well as good old JPEG. But as usual, for the majority of my testing, I just stuck it in full auto, just like the average consumer, and to be honest, on the Pixel 8 Pro, that's more than good enough. Thankfully, these days, I rarely get any bewildering grainy images, something which really plagued this phone up until roughly Christmas time. Although every so often you will see some weird distortion or general cackness that could only be caused by the post-processing shenanigans. Still, the Pixel 8 Pro mostly laughs in the face of high contrast and waves its willy at low light scenarios. Other phones may have more swanky sounding optics on paper, but Google knows how to add a bit of virtual spit and polish to your snaps, so you end up with natural looking results boasting realistic tones, rich contrast and no fallout, such as overly saturated HDR photos. The Pixel 8 Pro also has a pretty big advantage over the regular non-Pro model with that 48 meg telephoto shooter, capable of 5 times optical zoom. This makes a serious difference when you're zooming in, especially as the Pro could get you much closer, maxing out at 30 times zoom. No, it's not as impressive as Samsung's Galaxy S24 Ultra, and photos certainly get a bit smudgy when you zoom past the 20 times level, but it's great for getting closer to your subject without getting all up in their face. And you've also got yourself an ultra-wide option here on the Pixel 8 Pro. It's a 48 meg quad-beer sensor with a wider aperture than the regular Pixel 8. And this is certainly one of the better ultra-wides I've tested, offering that pulled-back dramatic viewpoint without any real compromise to the tones, and not a horrific amount of distortion around the edges. And if you want to shoot a bit of home movie action, well, there's no 8K abilities here on the Pixel 8 Pro, but honestly, who gives a flying about that? You can record up to 4K video with decent stabilization and excellent audio capture. You'll be rewarded with crisp, clear vocals even when there's a fair bit of background shindiggery going on. And you can even edit out any excess noise after the fact, but more on all that in a bit. And here in the Pro model, you've also got an exclusive video boost tool, which is really handy if the lighting is cack. And fair play, this really helps to brighten up your footage when you're shooting in dimmer conditions and produces more natural looking tones as well. It's not a massive leap, but it is good stuff at the cost of long processing times. And then finally up front, you've got a 10 meg selfie shooter, and oh my god, I look rough today. Got a good bit of autofocus action, and it's absolutely fine most of the time as long as the lighting isn't cack. But of course, where the Pixel 8 Pro really excels is the photo editing capabilities, including the new magic editing tool. This can tweak a photo on your behalf, make it look as good as possible, and as always, the ability to erase objects in photos is just bafflingly good. The way that the AI fills in the gaps is just, scary, man. The unblur tool, sadly, still rather limited. It certainly can't work miracles. More useful is the new portrait light feature, which allows you to tweak the lights and just balance it out in portrait shots. It's particularly handy if you've got a really bright background or your subject is a bit saturated, but to be honest, rarely happens with shots here on the Pixel 8 Pro anyway. And if you're shooting video in quite blustery conditions or somewhere outdoors where there's a lot of background noise, you've also got that excellent audio eraser feature, which can just siphon out all of that background crap. Really does work impressively well. But anyway, I've banged on more about all of that stuff in my Pixel 8 and Pixel 8 Pro tips and tricks guide. May have mentioned it already, definitely go check that out. And there you have it, my lovelies. That, in a tasty-wee nutshell, at long last, is what I reckon of the Pixel 8 Pro after using it for several months. And I gotta say that while it doesn't quite braise my beef in the same way that previous Pixel flagships have, I do really enjoy the Pixel 8 Pro, specifically for a lot of the exclusive features you get on Pixel phones. Although beyond the telephoto shooter, I'm not sure there's that many Pro exclusives that you won't find on the regular Pixel 8 that really warrant the upgrade. But anyway, that's what I reckon of the Pixel 8 Pro. But what about yourselves? If you've been using the Pixel 8 Pro as your full-time phone, definitely let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do poke, subscribe, and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. And have yourselves a ruddy, wonderful rest of the week. Cheers, everyone. Love you.